My name is Aisha Sampson, and today on Baptism Overland, we are sending power to the back of the Jeep so we can run a fridge, a liftgate light, and some 12-volt sockets. Sitting in front of you is a plethora of electric parts and supplies. Plethora. Who uses plethora anymore? See this guy? How many of you can identify what this is? Class? Correct! This is the trim piece that is found in the cargo hold of the Jeep JK. A few months ago, I installed these 12-volt sockets up here. They're wired directly to the battery. I installed it to a kill switch. That way, I can power this thing without having to turn the ignition on. However, in the past few months, as I started going outdoors more, I've realized that these just won't suffice. In overlanding and camping, we use the rear of our rigs a ton. We don't just use it for stowing, we also use that area so we can cook, and some people even use that area to go to bed, where they just crawl right through the tailgate, and yet there's never enough power back there. Sure, most vehicles will come with a 12-volt socket, but that's just not enough to run all the things that you want to run back there. If you keep tapping into that 12-volt socket, you are going to overheat that eventually when you're drawing too many amps coming through such a very thin wire. So today, I am going to be upgrading this system. I am plugging this 12-volt socket directly to a power distribution bar, and that power distribution bar will also power the liftgate light that I just purchased, and this guy. No, not this one, this one. The Iceco JP50. We are so excited. We finally have a fridge, and my son wanted to be around when I unboxed it, so here we are. Ready to open it and see what it looks like?
Yes.
All right. What do we got?
What do we got, baby?
And there you go. The Iceco JP50 fridge freezer combination. So in here, what do we got? We got the cover, which is great that it comes with a cover. Help protect this thing. We have our plugs and looks like more plugs. And this has a removable tray to put all of our items in. So if you've never done electrical before, don't let all these parts and supplies overwhelm you. It's really not as complicated as you think, as long as you keep one thing in mind. It's all about being safe. You have to put measures in place that in the event you draw too much power off of those wires, you will break a fuse or kill the circuit breaker way before those wires start to overheat and possibly burn down your vehicle, which almost happened to me. So as long as you're following the diagrams precisely and making sure you are putting safety measures in place like fuses and circuit breakers, then you should be fine. It's really not that hard. Now I will give you a full list in the description below of all the parts you're going to need, as well as the links on where to get them online. Unfortunately, you have to get most of this stuff online simply because they are some specialized parts that your local auto store may not have. Now, one of the specialty items that your local auto store may or may not have a full array of options for you to choose from is the power distribution block. This is the heart of your system. It's a very simple thing. Underneath the cover, you have a block, and on that block you have a positive terminal and a negative terminal. And what you do is you run a thicker gauged wire from your battery in the front all the way to the rear and plug it directly into the power distribution block. And from there, that will distribute power to all the items you need to have powered in the rear of your vehicle. In this situation, this is 6 bus, so that means you can charge up to 6 different items. So those will go to the 6 items you need powered. From those items, it'll go back to the ground, to one of these 6 terminals, and then from here you will get a ground wire that will go from the negative terminal all the way to a really good ground using the same thickness that you used going into it. And that's it. You're basically just running a thicker gauged wire to the rear of your vehicle so you can power more items, and then you are using this to distribute that power. So before we do the actual install, let's just go over the wiring diagram to make sure that everything is safe and it won't set your rig on fire. There's a lot of stuff going on here, so let's just go over it one at a time. Now obviously first we have your vehicle's battery. On that battery you have a positive and a negative terminal. We don't have to worry about the negative terminal today because that's already grounded somewhere and we're not even going to touch that area. Now on the positive side, coming out of the positive terminal, we're going to have 4-gauge wire. You want a thick wire here, maybe a 0, a 4, a 6, something that will be able to carry the load that you're going to be putting on it. Because remember, you're going to be running this all the way to the back of the vehicle. So if you have a wire that is too thin, like 10 or 12 or 14, you don't want to overload that wire with all that amp draw and suddenly you overheat the wire and it starts on fire, unless you obviously have a fuse that will kill it. You want a thick wire to be able to bring you all the power that you need to the back of the vehicle. So we're going with 4-gauge. Now directly from that 4-gauge wire right out of the battery, you're going to go directly into a circuit breaker. Now some of you might argue, well, we could just put it to a fuse, but I would tell you, go ahead and spend the money and get a circuit breaker. This just makes it a lot more convenient. Reason why I like a circuit breaker is if somehow or the other the system gets too much draw and it trips, it will just trip the switch. Then you just got to wait for it to reset the thing, and you should be good to go. Now, if it keeps tripping, then that tells you that somewhere along your electrical system, there's something that's shorting and it's going to keep tripping this, right? So you need to address that because this won't fix that. If something is shorting, you need to go and fix it immediately. But what's good is this will just trip, and then you turn it back on, see if it trips again. If it doesn't, then maybe it just needed to reset. What's also good about having a circuit breaker is that if you wanted to kill the power to the whole system, you just have to flick a switch. That's it. You don't have to sit there and grapple with a fuse and take it out, put the fuse back in, or if you break a fuse and you don't have any extra fuses, it's just a lot more headache going to a fuse. So it's better that you go with a circuit breaker. Also, the reason why you don't want to go with a fuse holder, this is a fuse holder. And these fuse holders don't have very thick wires at the end of it. And if you're going from a 4-gauge wire to something this thin, that's just not going to work. So this is probably not going to be the best thing for you to do. Go with the circuit breaker, makes it easier. From the circuit breaker, we're going to continue with that 4-gauge wire all the way to the rear of the vehicle. And from there, that will plug directly into the power distribution block. And that is where we will now power everything else. So as you can see in the diagram, the 4-gauge wire goes into that distribution block. And then from there, a positive will go out to each of the items that you want to have powered. And then from those items, it's going to go negative back up to the distribution block and then out to the negative terminal, and then we will ground the distribution block somewhere else in the rear. Here's the key thing. Whatever gauge you have coming into that distribution block has to be the same gauge that's coming out of it. So as you can see, 4-gauge wire going into the positive, 4-gauge wire going out to the negative. Now the wires that you get for your accessories, that you can minimize. You don't need 4-gauge wire to power up a little LED light strip. That's just overkill and that's stupid. So what I have for the liftgate light as well as the 12-volt sockets, I'm just going to run 16-gauge wires to those and then back out again using 16-gauge. Now using 16-gauge wire to run an LED light strip and some 12-volt sockets is just fine. However, for the fridge, I wanted to make sure I get something thicker. As of right now, I don't know yet how many amps that fridge is going to draw from the power supply. I heard it's very low, but just to be safe, I'm going to go with 10-gauge for the fridge. That 10-gauge will make sure that I have enough power going to the fridge and keep it topped off. Now that 10-gauge wire is going to run directly to a new 12-volt socket. This new 12-volt socket will be mounted somewhere back there and it will be dedicated to nothing but the fridge. So that's the wiring. Like I said, it's really not that complicated. It's really just making sure that you have fuses and circuit breakers all in the right place to protect your system. So let's go ahead and let's install. All right, so the first thing I really want to do is set everything up. Just make sure that all the things that I want to power is all in its place and have all the wires be ready to go so that when I put in the distribution hub, all I got to do is just plug it in and we should be good. So remember, there are 3 things that we are plugging up back here. We have our 12-volt socket, which we already had before, and I have enough wiring there that this will reach the distribution hub really easily, so I don't have to do anything here. The next thing is I need to put another 12-volt socket for the fridge, and that's going to go over into another area back here, and I'll show you what I do with that. And then the third thing is the LED liftgate light, which is going to go right here. And I'm going to have a switch for that on this side so that I can just turn the light on over here and I'm not crowding this area with too many wires because I already have two things going on over here. So LED liftgate light, switch over here, 12-volt sockets over here, and then the 12-volt socket for the fridge back there. So let's go ahead and start out with the 12-volt socket that's made for the fridge. Now this is what's on the other side of that trim piece, and in another video that I saw, and I'll put the description on it below, where they installed a fridge, he actually found a good spot to put this, which is right here. It fit just right because there's enough space and it won't hit the seatbelt mount that's already on there. So we're going to go ahead and put this on here, and this will kind of face towards the front of the Jeep, and so this will give me just a good area to plug in that fridge. All right, so the 12-volt socket for the fridge is done. This is only going to be for the fridge and nothing else. As you can see, it looks real factory, looks really clean. Inside we have the positive and negative wires already plugged in, so all I got to do is put this to the distribution hub and we're good to go, and that'll be powered up. I did wrap it with some electrical tape just because the seat belt harness is actually here, and the last thing I want is the metal parts for that seatbelt bracket to kind of touch this. So just to be safe, I wrapped it with some electrical tape just to kind of protect all the connections over here. And this part's done. Now we'll move on to the liftgate. All right, next thing we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and install the liftgate light. There is a light bar that actually goes right along here. We're going to go ahead and install that, get the wires wired down to this. Then I'm going to remove this thing, put a switch on it, and plug this up and be ready to go. All right, so the LED strip is wired up, good to go. What's really cool is that all I got to do now is just plug this to whatever wiring I put on the switch. And this white cable here that came with this kit actually allows you to use a remote control if you want to turn it on from far away. I probably will never really use this thing, but since it came with the kit, let me just go ahead and get it. That way too, I can just keep it in my pocket if I need to light it up or something like that at night. But I mean, it's a really cool feature. I don't know if I'll ever use it, but it's always good to just have it on there. It just plugs right in anyway. All right, next thing we're going to do is we'll go ahead and remove this thing so that I can go ahead and attach a switch to this top area. Let's move that out of the way first and pop off the seatbelt latch. This comes right off. There you go. Next thing is you want to remove the two bolts, one here and one there. There's a bolt back there that you probably can't see from here, but you can feel it right here. You need to remove that. Don't just pull this thing off. If you do that, you're going to snap it, and that's what I did on the other side before. All right, so this is where the switch is basically going to go. I'm going to put it right around the same area that I have on the other side. All right, so the next thing I want to do is go ahead and wire this up. And how we do that is basically we're going to take the cord that this came with. This plugs into the light itself. You're going to have to split this because this power wire will go to where it says load on here. It's the middle one, so that'll go in the middle. Then we're going to get a power wire and have it extend out towards the distribution bar. And then I'm going to also have to get a ground wire and put that there and put that to the distribution bar. But what I'm going to do is connect this ground wire, possibly just splice it right into this one. That way I don't have to extend this any further. All right, as you can see, everything is wired up now. You got your power that's going to go over to the distribution bar. So I'll put that aside. Got the negative ground, which is also going to go to the power distribution bar. And then this is the power wire here that goes to the LED light. And all I got to do is plug this end into that other end that I showed you earlier. These kind of switches are a little bit different than what you might see. They're 3-prong, and the reason why is because you also have to ground this switch so that every time you flip this on, it lights up. All right, basically from here, all we got to do now is put everything back in its place. I already kind of got it started. I put the trim back on, and what I did was I'm going to have the wires come out from the top, because from here, I'm going to run it along the edge here, all the way over there across the seat and into where my distribution bar is going to be. Basically the same thing on the other side. We're going to go ahead and put this back on. So I'm going to run this up at the top again like I did before, just so I can run this wire along the edge here as well. So there you go. 12-volt switches are here. That should light up. Another 12-volt back here for the fridge. All right, now that everything has been set up in the back of the Jeep for all the items that will be plugged into the distribution block, we are now going to build the front part of this system, which are the wires coming out of the battery. And for that, like we showed in the diagram, we are using 4-gauge wire. So what I'm going to do is attach these to the 4-gauge wires, because you can't just use regular crimps anymore, because these are much, much thicker. So we're actually going to be using this for our positive and these for our negatives. And because I don't have a crimping tool for something this large, we're going to just try to use a razor and hopefully just be able to cut this. I mean, it's basically the same thing. I'm just going to slice open. Just be careful, don't cut yourself. Here's your wires, and now from here I'm going to plug directly into this. And what's good about this system is that you don't need to crimp it. It's basically screws that you just screw in. If you can see it, there are Allen bolts in there. And there you go. So now we just have to do the negative side. I'm only doing one side because I don't know yet how long I'm going to need these wires to be. So we just do one side of each of them, but save this one for later. Okay, to get power over to the distribution block, the first thing I did was go ahead and mount a circuit breaker. I did have a circuit breaker already there before for my switch pod, so all I had to do is mount this new circuit breaker next to it so that it looks really clean and easy to see. Now I did have to make a new mount. The mount that I had before was only able to fit one circuit breaker, so I just took an L bracket, a little bit of a longer one, mounted them next to each other, and then that L bracket is then screwed into the factory hole right there on the left side. From here, all I'm going to do is take a 4-gauge wire, plug it into the circuit breaker, run that 4-gauge wire across the hood, and then into the firewall, and then into the vehicle, and from there we will go to the distribution block. I won't be plugging this into the battery directly just yet, just for safety issues. I don't want any current running through this while we do the install, so we will save that for last. All right, now that we got our positive wire mounted from the circuit breaker down the hood, through the firewall, and into the vehicle, it's now coming in from back here, running along the bottom well of the Jeep, and it's going to go to the back where the distribution block will be, and I'll show you that. But before we plug it up, we're going to go ahead and ground the system too. We're going to get our grounding wire. There's actually a great ground right here. You don't even have to take the trim off because you can see it. You could just plug this right into that one, and that's what I've used for my grounds for many applications. So just go ahead and plug it into that one, or run it through here also, and now we'll have both wires going to the back, and then we'll install it to our distribution block. All right, here we are in the rear of the vehicle on the driver's side. Right there is where I have the wires coming into the back, and then it's going underneath that trim, underneath the carpet, and then into the cargo hold. And right in the cargo hold, there's a box that I had built a while ago. I know I'm going to be rebuilding that box pretty soon, but for now, I think that would be a good spot for me to mount the distribution block. That way I have easy access to it. Alright guys, we are pretty much almost there. I got the distribution block finally installed. Over here you have the positive terminal, and then you have the negative terminal. This is already grounded. This is already going to the circuit breaker. And right below, I have all the wires that I need that I will now be plugging into this system. This one by itself is the one that goes to the LED light strip on the liftgate. The two thicker ones over here are the ones that goes to the fridge. And then the two thinner ones over here are to the 12-volt sockets. So now all I'm going to do is crimp these up, plug them in, and then we will hook up the battery and put some fuses in, and let's see if this whole thing works. All the positive leads have been put in. It says overhead light, accessory, and refrigerator as labels, and then it goes to the negative terminal on the other side. So all we have to do now is hook this up to a battery. I've already put fuses inside. Go ahead and hook up the circuit breaker to the battery, turn the circuit breaker on, and let's see if this system works. All right, we're all set up. Now I just have to turn on the circuit breaker right here. We should be powered up. Let's go check the back. All right, test number one is going to be the 12-volt sockets. If that blue light above lights up, then I know I got power to it. It lit up. There it is. All right, test number two is the liftgate light. If the switch lights up, then I know I got power to that. There it is. And finally, test number three is to see if the fridge works. It works. Okay, let's be honest. How awesome was that? I know it's a really weird thing for me to geek out about, but you have to understand that prior to me setting up this system, I was already looking for another switch pod system for the Jeep. I have the Apollo Intech now, which has all the rocker panel switches at the very top. It's all hooked up to my lights. It works great, and so I figured that might be another kind of system that I want to do for all the things I want to power in the rear. So I was looking at their new system, which has all the switches on the A-pillar. I even considered just spending the money and getting an S-Pod so I can put it back there. And then I remembered that most of these switch pod systems are usually ignition reliant, which means that for you to run these things, you have to have the key in the ignition. And that's just not going to work for the things that I wanted to power back there. The 12-volt sockets, I can't have it be ignition reliant for the simple fact that I need to charge my phones, I need to charge my camera batteries, and I need to charge a lot of things back there, and I cannot have the key in the ignition while I do that. So that's not going to work for a switch pod type of system. The second thing is the fridge. I can't have this be ignition reliant either, because let's say we're using it at camp. I can't leave the key in the ignition the whole time just so that this can continue to draw power. Number two, I can't use this when I'm going grocery shopping because I usually leave the vehicle and take the key out of the ignition. If I do that, this won't get any power, and now it's not going to be as cold as I need it to be when I need to put my groceries in there. So this can't be ignition reliant to a switch pod either. And then finally, the liftgate light. I definitely cannot have that to a switch pod type of system because when I get to camp, what I usually do is I park the Jeep, take the key out of the ignition, step out, go to the back and start unloading. Well, I can't keep the key in the ignition while I turn the light on back there and then start to unload stuff. And then while we're at camp, if I need to get something in the back of the vehicle, are you telling me that I now have to go into the vehicle, put the key in the ignition, and then go to the back and then flick the switch just so I can light things up back there? It would make no sense. So I knew that the switch pod system was not going to work. So I started playing around with different schematics, kind of just mapping out in my brain how I'm going to make this thing work. And then I called up Chris Chubb, and together we kind of just looked over the plan and kind of designed a system that we knew would work, and it absolutely does. Now, everything in the back that I want to have powered is working exactly the way I envisioned. Now, I've had these 12-volt sockets before, but to be honest, I was kind of worried about charging some things on there because I had 16 gauge wire running from the back of the vehicle all the way to the battery. And what I didn't want is to overheat those wires and cause a fire. Sure, I had a fuse now because I learned from my first mistake, but I still was kind of worried about, can I charge my phone or can I charge my camera batteries without this drawing too much? But now that we have 4 gauge wire going all the way to the back, I now have the ample power that I can charge whatever it is that I need without having to worry about catching fire. And then the second thing is the fridge. This thing is awesome, and I'm so glad it now has its own dedicated 12-volt socket, so I don't have to use up any of the other 12-volt sockets that's in the vehicle. It now has its own dedicated 12-volt socket that will continue to top this off at the temperature we want it to be. Now, I will do a full review on the Iceco fridge, just to let you know the things that I do like and kind of didn't like also, but we'll talk about that in another video. And then finally, the liftgate light. I'm always having a problem. Every time I'm unloading the vehicle, it's always so dark and I can't see anything. Or when we're at camp, I have to go get stuff in the back of the vehicle and I'm using my flashlight or I'm using lanterns and I can never find anything back there. And now I just hit a switch and it lights up like daytime. It's so bright back there and it's so convenient. Just being able to open the tailgate, the switch is right there, and I can utilize that for whatever it is I need to utilize that for. But that's it. That's the entire electrical schematic, and I am so glad I set it up this way, because between this system and the switch pod system that I already have, and then throw in some portable power in there like Jackeries or Goal Zeros, add solar into the mix, and then maybe one day down the road get a dual battery system, we should have enough power to last us for a few days when we go to a site that does not have electricity. And I know a lot of people are probably going to look at this and be like, that's a little bit of an overkill. I mean, you have 4 gauge wire going all the way to the back. I mean, you could have probably gotten away with 8. And yeah, I get that. But sometimes it's better to overkill and not need it all than to underkill and not have enough power and now you're overheating certain wires. I just wanted to be safe and I wanted to make sure everything was in its place. Like, I really took my time with this install. It's not hard. If you follow the schematics, it's not really that hard, but I wanted to make sure I took my time so that all the safety measures were in place. So if you decide to do this system too, Just take your time. Make sure everything is in the right place because you're dealing with a lot of electrical components here. You're dealing with thicker wires. You're dealing with a lot of wires going all over the place. Just take your time. Make sure it's neat. Make sure it's clean. And make sure you have all your fuses and circuit breakers in the right place. I know for me, when I was trying to set up a system like this, I just couldn't find anybody that set up their system this way. So maybe you're in that same boat looking for a system that's not reliant on the ignition and you wanted to power a few things. Well, here you go. I hope that it was informative for you. And if it was, then don't forget to like this video, subscribe to our channel if you haven't already, and don't forget to follow us on Instagram at Baptism Overland. My name is Asia Sampson, and I will see you next time.